old man. What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a lore video for Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, simply about the gods. I do want to mention a couple things. First things first, tons of spoilers for both the games. Be aware of that. If you don't want them, highly suggest you watch this later. Also, I'm going to breeze through a couple topics that are related to the gods, simply because I've talked about them at length in other videos. For instance, the Titans, which were the physical bodies that gods used to walk around in at one point. I have a longer video about those, so I'm not really going to talk about it too much. So things like that and a couple other subjects I won't actually be going super in depth with because I've made lore videos for them already. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that this is going to be an overview of the gods as a whole, their purpose in the world, the slightly more specific details of how they were made, as specific as the games really get, and moreover, answer a couple of questions that I get in comment sections every once in a while. Now, originally, I actually wasn't going to do this video because in a lot of ways it kind of felt like a disambiguation page on a wiki, so I just wasn't planning on actually doing this. Then I got questions in comment sections about the exact type of things I wanted to cover in this video, so I decided to go ahead and do it anyway. But just keep in mind that we're not going to be going over specific gods and everything there is to know about each one. I'll probably do separate videos for each. Some of them have a wealth of information about them. Some of them are left pretty ambiguous as far as the lore is concerned. But with that out of the way, let's talk more specifics. Now, as we learn in the first game, the gods aren't necessarily gods in the traditional sense. They certainly have the power of gods. However, they are ultimately just the culmination of the Engwithan Society's research into animancy, which is the study of souls. To put it very briefly, because I have a video about the Engwithans as well as animancy, in the time of the Engwithans, which is about 2,000-ish years before the actual games take place, religious wars were very common because every culture believed in different gods and they would fight over them, as well as the wheel, which is the natural metaphysical process that governs the reincarnation of souls in this particular universe, left a lot to be desired because it caused a lot of what are called soul maladies, which are where there's a problem with a soul in the body it's supposed to be connected to, which can cause a variety of ailments. So kind of all of those things combined led the Engwithans to start studying animancy really in depth. And what they eventually found was that when they were looking for the gods, or if there was something out there, what they found was nothing. Basically, that if there was ever something that existed and created everything, it is no longer there at the very least. With this information, the Engwithans devised a very complex plot to take control of the wheel, to simultaneously put not necessarily an end to soul maladies, but greatly reduce their occurrences, as well as put an end to all these religious wars that were taking place because all these cultures believed in different gods. Now, the way this was done is that the Engwithans started building all sorts of animancy machinery, which is to say they used things like Audra, as well as just machines in general, to manipulate soul energy, with the ultimate goal being to turn a great number of them into gods. Now, once this machinery was built and the Engwithans were ready, they all agreed, collectively, that a man named Theos Ix Arcanon would be the god's agent on Eora, which is the world in Pillars of Eternity. So because of that, Theos led the sacrifices of his people that turned them into gods. So the way this worked was Theos would gather tons of Engwithans in ritual sites, specifically the one at Sun and Shadow, which we see at the end of the first game. This is where he would gather his people and eventually sacrifice them, and their machinery would cause their collective souls to coalesce into a god. Most people can wrap their head around that. That's pretty straightforward, I guess, as far as in-game lore goes. However, what you actually have to dig a little bit for in games is to find out that the gods they chose to make, being 11 in total, were all modeled after concepts as well as particular legends that were around during the time of Engwithans. It goes deeper than that because the people they chose to sacrifice to make each god were kind of not necessarily like the embodiment of that thing, but related to it. For instance, Skain, the god of secret hatred, resentment, violent rebellion. In order to make him, it's recorded that they used people who were malcontents or criminals, things like that. So basically, Theos oversaw mass sacrifices in which all of those people's souls coalesced to form the new god. There was 11 of these in total. It was not all of the Engwithan society, because the rest of the Engwithans, who weren't chosen to be sacrifices, carried on as missionaries working for Theos, where they then spread the new faith that they had just created. And over a period of about 700-ish years in-game, this religion became the only religion of Eora. And the Engwithans eventually made vows of not exactly celibacy, but simply to not have any children. Slowly, over those 700 years that I mentioned, the rest of the Engwithans kind of died out. So that leaves us with our 11 gods. Now, we still have quite a bit to talk about. So first things first, one of the gods, Wodika, was supposed to be the ruler of the other 10. The other 10 gods pretty much immediately rejected that idea and cast Wodika down to be equal in power with the rest of them. Theos had actually pledged to listen to Wodika specifically, and continued to do so, and we saw that kind of play out in the first game. I have a video about Theos, so I'm not covering that very much either, but just something worth mentioning. The exact timeline of that happening, that is to say the gods casting Wodika down to be equal to the rest of them, we're not sure when that happens. It's never actually stated, it's just mentioned in-game as a fact. Wodika will talk about it with you, or at least kind of mention it, and she's also called the Queen That Was very often by her followers. Now, in addition, we also don't know the timeline of a couple other things. For instance, all of the gods collectively used to walk around in what are called Titans, which the Engwithans grew, as the game states, for their new gods. Titans were basically giant bodies of flesh and bone, as we learn about in-game. Again, this is another subject I have a video about already. However, I just want to kind of touch on it. The Titans were used by the gods for a while, until some problems arose, and eventually Abaddon was struck down, or at least his Titan was, by one of the other gods, Andra. So Abaddon was the god of crafting, the forge, and preservation. Andra was the goddess of, like, the sea and marine things. Now, ultimately, Andra wound up killing, though not intentionally, Abaddon's Titan. This damaged Abaddon to the point where it changed what he was the god of. He was no longer, after this happened, the god of preservation anymore. His Titan dying stripped him of that. So because of that, all the gods chose to abandon their Titans, and they walked to a place called Ukaizo, which was part of the structures that were built to ascend them to godhood, and they left their Titans there to rot. Now, it's around this time that we also know that the gods made a pact with each other after this happened to basically not interfere with the goings-on and dealings of the Kith, that is to say, the people on the world of Eora. The exact nature of this agreement isn't known, but we do know that most of the gods are in favor of the Kith actually trying to strengthen their own souls. They want them to pursue animancy, so that the Kith can become stronger and fend for themselves better, because the gods see that as the natural progression of society. However, Wodika specifically hates that, doesn't want at any point the Kith trying to usurp the gods' power over the world. But with all of that out of the way, let's wrap this up simply by talking about each of the 11 gods and what they are the god of. Not going to go in depth as far as everything to know about that god, but just kind of to give everybody this god is the god of this type of thing. So first things first, we have Abaddon. Abaddon, as I mentioned, is now only really the god of crafting and the forge. He used to be the god of preservation as well, though, as I mentioned, that is no longer the case. Then we have Berath, the god of cycles, doors, and death. Berath is interesting because she's known to take 2 avatars at the same time, which is the Pallid Knight and the Usher. One of them being a kind of gaunt female woman in black armor, and the other one being an old man. Berath herself is kind of the incarnation of the wheel. Now, the gods themselves aren't the wheel by any means, but if you had to pick one god that kind of represented the wheel, that's her. That's kind of Berath's realm, is the smooth operation of the wheel. Then there is Eothas. Eothas is the god of light and redemption. Eothas is mentioned quite a bit in both of the games, and we will have a ton to talk about when it comes to him and doing an actual lore video just about him. Generally speaking, he is the god of light, redemption, rebirth. There is a bit of a darker aspect to him, and we can see that through Jodi, the companion in Pillars of Eternity 2. but we'll get into that at the appropriate time. Then we have Gallowayne. Gallowayne is the god of the hunt in every form that takes. Then we have Hylia. Hylia is the goddess of the birds and the sky. Basically, if you got wings or you are the air, that's Hylia. That said, she also seems to have a great respect for life in general and actively wants to give things a chance to live. And then we have Magrin, the goddess of fire and war. Also, the goddess of trials. Testing her followers and constantly challenging people is Magrin's whole thing. Then we have Andra, which is the goddess of the water and the moon. She is actually one of the other gods we know a decent amount about. And then there is Rimmergand, my personal favorite. He is also a god of death, just like Barath is, but Rimmergand is different. Barath is the god of death, but also kind of the god of reincarnation because she controls the wheel in all its forms. Rimmergand is a god of death that wants things to end. He wants oblivion, entropy, as he calls it. He's also the god of famine, plague, and just straight up bad luck. Then we have Skain. Skain is the god of secret hatred, resentment, violent rebellion. He's also often depicted as a slave and is basically the only god that ever often aligns itself with Wodika, albeit even then fairly rare, but most of the other gods don't get along with Wodika by any means. Then we have Whale, the god of secrets, dreams, mysteries, revelations. Whale is all about keeping things secret and just kind of the chaos of leaving things to the unknown. And then last but not least, we have Wodika, the goddess of law, memory, rightful rulership, vengeance. Wodika is again one of the ones that we know quite a bit about. And just a little extra, we actually see the sign of the Oathbinders in the trailer for Avowed. So I imagine Wodika will probably be at least decently prevalent in that game. No, that's just a guess, that's just speculation. But you do see a symbol of her followers in that trailer. Now, Wodika is again one of the ones there's actually quite a bit to say about. She orchestrated with Theos a plan to try to reinstate herself to her place above the other gods as part of the first game. Whereas Theos is the direct antagonist, Wodika was the unseen antagonist of the first game. Though, to be fair, you can actually side with her as well if you do it right. That said, guys, there you go. There is just kind of an overview of all the gods in total. In the future, I will be doing individual videos about each god. For today, that is going to wrap it up. So thank you so much for watching. Truly, truly do appreciate it. Couldn't do this without you guys, so just thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.